There are multiple purposes and meanings to graffiti besides the average American stereotype of vandalism and gang relations. During my research, I came across a really interesting website, the Oracle Education Foundation, which was created by 4 kids all under the age of 15. They would not give their actual location. However, they did tell us all about how there is so much more to graffiti besides the vandalism and gang relations, which I will go into later. As they explain through, I'm going to quote from them, graffiti. This is something most of us see every day. When you do think of graffiti, does your mind go to vandalism or art? End quote. This is important because art tells stories, just as graffiti can do. Graffiti usually puts off an anger, scared, uncomfortable situation around people as the general stereotype when you're around it. However, while others with other types of graffiti can take a self-expression, art, and communication through it. I did a lot of research throughout this and have talked to quite a few friends who have gone to foreign countries and experienced it, and it has really broadened my views on how I've looked at graffiti. I want my audience to understand that graffiti has more than one purpose and they are able to broaden their own opinions themselves. Graffiti has more meaning and purpose than the American stereotype perceives. I'll talk to you about history of graffiti and go into cavemen and Roman times. Next, I will talk about when it first arrived to the US and how the stereotypes came about. And finally, I'll touch on Chile and the different cultures and how it compares to the US. So to begin with the Stone Age, you wouldn't think the Stone Age would be graffiti. Most of the time they think of it as communication, self-expression, way before language even began. However, by the actual definition of graffiti, from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, I quote, pictures or words painted or drawn on wall, building, etc., end quote. Which is what they did. They drew on rocks to communicate and self-express. Also, in the Roman times, they gained territory. So not only did they just use it for the communication self-expression, but in the wars, as they proceeded on to more territory and more land, they would mark it with graffiti and say, this is mine now, not yours, which is quite interesting. Also, to build more on the communication, old buildings and ancient times, they have graffiti all over them from them. And from the Smithsonian website, I quote, in a stairwell, people took turns quoting popular poems and adding their own clever twists. In other places, the graffiti included drawings, a boat, a peacock, a leaping deer, end quote. Now that I've talked about the Stone Age and the Roman times, I'm going to now move on to the 1970s to current day in the United States and talk about more how stereotypes came. So, it was graffiti started off in the United States as tagging. And tagging is when you just write your name somewhere. Taki is a really famous tagger. He was actually known for bringing graffiti to the United States. He was a 17-year-old boy in New York City. However, that's not true. He wasn't the first one to graffiti. He's just the largest one. Everyone in New York City knew Taki. He ended up also being blamed for bringing competition of taggers, which as you can see in these two pictures here, there's tagging everywhere. There's no room for it anymore. From the Oracle Education Foundation, it gave me a lot of insight from those kids, and just to summarize a quote, graffiti is all over the subways and streets of New York to point out where there was more than there was any even room for tagging. And it's also really disrespectful to graffiti. It's like an unknown rule that they don't tag over somebody else's graffiti. So, kind of interesting. Also, another form of graffiti that we have as stereotypes is gangs. It's all related to gangs. However, if you go back to when the Romans, as they built their territory, just as gangs did, they'll mark a street or a bench or a building and say, hey, this is my territory now. That's yours. Stay off of it. And so that's kind of how gangs became affiliated with graffiti. From the Oracle Education Foundation website, as I spoke of earlier, I quote, graffiti is a form of self-expression and creativity. Some graffiti artists might be angry at something or someone. They take it out on walls. Some people paint graffiti just to be vandalizing. Gangs paint graffiti to mark their territory. But some people create graffiti with a hidden message. Some people make graffiti with a purpose, to let out their feelings and to add a bit of color to everyone's life. End quote. Now that I've talked about stereotypes in the US, I'm going to move on to Chile and how their stories are brought out through graffiti. So my friend Kirsten Ingleby went to Chile a couple years ago and has told me many stories. And when she brought back all these pictures, I was first intrigued with graffiti. It lightened up a part of my life that I didn't even know existed. They have stories back there that are just about the beauty. You go there and you walk down the streets and it's just beautiful with graffiti. It's all art. There's no vandalism, there's no gang relations as much as it is graffiti equals art there. They also communicate through their communities. As the first two pictures show, as the dog and the kid's crying. So there's a little story behind this, let it be true or let it be myth. The dog was a police dog who was chasing after the kid and killed the kid. The kid ended up being accused by the police officer who sicked the dog on him of being in a gang when he was just a little boy. It brought fear to the community, and someone drew this as a memoir for him. The girl is living peacefully. She is a little bit different of a story. She's actually the opposite. It's about harmony, peace, happiness brought to the community and your inner self. These two photos have not been touched as far as I know, and they are used as a work of art and to look at. What's really interesting, and I don't know if you guys can tell, is the picture of these are actually on the side of the wall here. So they're very big contrast with each other as well. With all of that, it's time to come to an end to my presentation. I showed a couple of more graffitis that my friend Kirsten was able to take in Chile. Today I talked about the history of graffiti and how cavemen and the Roman times used it for communication and to mark their own land. Then I moved on to when it first arrived in the United States and how stereotypes began. And finally I ended with the Chile and the culture and how the stereotypes there are quite different from ours here. I hope today that I've portrayed the differences in graffiti and that you guys are able to make your own opinions and judgments on graffiti when you see it from here on out. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Have you been in downtown Boise?
Very, very rarely.
Have you seen there's an alleyway and then there's a lot of
Yeah,
there's a gallery.
it's like that here too.
You should check it out sometime.
I will.
They have like Malcolm X and all that, like real things you can, they use them as glass there. It's really interesting.
That would be really interesting. I would go check that out. I haven't really gone downtown since I moved here.
So you're talking about graffiti alley?
Yeah, it's
Graffiti gallery. It's really cool.
It's like a whole alleyway. They just repainted.
Art.
Yeah, it's like you go down the whole alley and then once you get to like close to the middle, then you see another.
That's really cool. I will have to definitely go check that.
There's like an underground one, and if we go in there, and then we walk in there, and there's inside the parking garage is like graffiti all on the walls too.
Very interesting.